Today I'm covering a new franchise. Well, at least a new franchise for game theory. It's actually a really old franchise. An old franchise with self-contradictory lore, and a very dedicated and very protective fan base. A fan base that I have no doubt is sure to hate whatever I say in this episode, regardless of how much research I do, poking holes in the theory as a result of that aforementioned contradictory lore. It's also a franchise with enemies that look like this, or this, where teenagers unleash their powers by doing this. Just know that the YouTube monetization bots are gonna be all over this episode. So the bots are gonna hate it, the fans are gonna hate it, and the people who don't know the series probably didn't click on this thing in the first place. Which leads to perhaps the biggest question about today's episode. Not so much what happened to Yu's shadow in Persona 4, but why the did I choose to do this episode? Hello Internet, welcome to Game Theory, subtitle Glutton for Punishment. And the flagellation stick I'm beating myself with today is none other than Persona, part of the MEGAMI TENSEI franchise. A franchise that's one of the longest running in gaming history, but also one that's been coasting under most players' radars for that same amount of time. Or at least it was until the critical acclaim for Persona 5 last year, which put a big ol' spotlight on this mainstay of the JRPG scene. Getting
Persona 5 from Atlas
mentioned in the same breath as Normie-approved giants of gaming like
Zelda Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey.
Now, for those of you who haven't played it, know that it is absolutely a worthy contender for Game of the Year, and absolutely worth the 100 hours or so it's going to take to get through all the dungeon grinding, heart stealing, and social link building. But today, I wanted to rewind it back, all the way back a decade, to 2008. Yeah, 2008 was a decade ago. To dive deep into its equally worthy predecessor, Persona 4, in an attempt to expose the shadowy mystery lurking behind its very cute and most unbearably adorable fluffball, Teddy. Now, a bit of a recap for those of you who haven't played Persona 4, or honestly, those of you who've forgotten all the details because, like I said, it has been a decade. Sorry, I don't mean to rub it in or anything. Time affects me too, you know. Oh boy, do I ever know. Oh, and inevitably this video gets into spoiler territory, so final warning if you are planning to play this game but somehow hadn't managed to get around to it sometime in the past 10 years. To you guys, I only have 4 words to say. Spoiler alert and time management. Alright, so the story of Persona 4 revolves around our main character, who we learn is named Yu Narukami from the anime and spin-offs, and a group of high school misfits as they try to stop a serial murderer, who, as you can see, has got some designs to die for. To solve the murders, Yu and the Scooby Gang, who I henceforth deem the Scooby Gang, discover something called the Midnight Channel, a Japanified version of Adult Swim that shows kidnapped victims live and on your screen, 12 o'clock Japanese time, 8 o'clock a.m. Pacific, 9 o'clock Mountain and Central. Hoping to save victims that they see on the Midnight Channel, the Scooby Gang head over to their local department store
every day's great at your tuna
to find a TV big enough to jump into. Remember, this was back in 2008 when not everyone had a giant flat screen panel on their wall. Inside the TV world, they meet Teddy, a half-bear, half-kinder egg. Teddy is technically a shadow, defined as suppressed human thoughts given physical form. But unlike the rest of the shadows in the TV world, he seems less interested in attacking the Scooby Gang and more interested in acting as some sort of kind, cuddly tour guide. From there, the game boils down to a basic formula. Someone disappears, the Scooby Gang goes to rescue him inside the Midnight Channel, the person they went in to rescue is forced to confront the parts of their own personality that they hate the most, and after a boss fight coupled with a bit of self-reflection, they accept their shadow and gain a persona. Roll credits. And just so we're clear, a persona is just like a shadow. It's a manifestation of a person's inner thoughts, but a persona is actually tamed and trained. It's kinda like a mask for someone to use to face hardships, and from a gameplay standpoint, it can be called upon in battle to unleash magic powers. Now, all the main characters in the game go through this process, and I do mean everyone. Even Teddy, who we learned through his social link was himself a shadow when all of this started.
I was just a shadow in that world.
He eventually faces a shadow version of himself and gains a persona of his own. Everyone goes through this process. Everyone, except for the fearless leader of the group, you. Y-U, not Y-O-U, although it is you playing as you, so you could also apply in that sentence. Sure, you gets himself a persona. In fact, he gets his first, but his just shows up right before the tutorial fight where he battles some generic enemies. He just hears a voice telling him to
call forth what is within.
And he gets his persona without ever having to fight a stupid-looking boss. Throughout the entirety of the game, we never actually meet Yu's shadow. And that sent my theorist sense a tingling. It's just such an odd pattern to break. Everyone else needs to meet and accept their shadow in order to gain a persona, but you, the main character of the game, completely neglects this part of the process. But he must have a shadow somewhere, right? That is the whole point of this game, coming to terms with the parts of you that you don't want to acknowledge. So then where is it? Where is Yu's shadow? Well, I'm here today to say that it's been staring us in the face the entire game. That's right. What I'm proposing is that Teddy, sweet, lovable, cuddly, Humpty Dumpty-esque Teddy, is secretly Yu's former shadow. Now, that at first might seem like me trying to put together pieces that don't really belong to try and retrofit an answer. We have one character who, for no apparent reason, is missing a shadow, and we have another character who was a former shadow and has himself a mysterious backstory that he just so happens to not remember. Add the two together, stir well, and boom, you got yourself a theory. But that's not the way it's gonna work here. I mean, sure, it's definitely suspicious, and it's initially what got me looking in this direction, but the connections between Teddy and Yu are written into the very fabric of the gameplay. Let's look at the facts. In Persona 4's True End, the final climactic battle begins with you hearing the voices of people he's closest to. To use the in-game text directly, the hearts of those you form the deepest bonds with become your strength. These words of encouragement come from everyone that Yu's maxed out a social link with. The characters that you as the player have spent the most time with come to lend you their strength in his moment of greatest need. It is a beautiful sequence with even minor characters like the Shrine Fox coming in to lend their support if you spend enough time with them. I get all emotional just watching it. But the thing is, you can totally play this game like an antisocial a-hole. You can still get to the ending of the game without spending time with anyone at school or your family at home. In this scenario, no one will come to support you in that final battle because you failed to max out all their social links. Well, no one except for one person. Bear, egg, thing. You guessed it. It's Teddy. Yes! Even if you intentionally play the game like a jerk, becoming the king of turds to rule over all Turdville, Teddy's social link will always be maxed out by the end of the game. You, as you, can reject everyone except for Teddy. It is impossible to become the world's savior without Teddy's support. The game literally won't allow it to happen. There is no separating the two. As Tom Cruise said,
"You complete me."
Almost like a shadow and its owner. But that's not all. One part of the game that often goes overlooked is the Velvet Room, a place that exists between consciousness and subconsciousness, where Yu meets the creepy-looking Igor and his assistant Elizabeth to do things like fuse personas and get long-winded lectures about the game's themes. During our first visit to this shagadelic ride, we learned that it's a place that's only accessible to those who've received a special invitation. Quote from the game,
"Only those who are bound by a contract may enter."
And in Persona 4, the only people able to enter this room throughout the entirety of the game are you, Igor, and Igor's assistant. We never once see anyone else enter the Velvet Room. No one, at least, except for Teddy. He seems to just stumble into it, almost as if completely by accident. And there, he and you just sit around and have a conversation. Now, remember, Teddy is a being who started off as a shadow and seems to have no real history before humans entered the TV realm. He has no connections to Igor and his contract, so it makes absolutely zero sense that he'd be able to enter the Velvet Room when no one else can. That is, unless you consider that there's something more to his identity. Remember, shadows are a part of the original person, the parts of themselves that they don't want to confront. If Teddy is Yu's shadow, that means that Teddy literally is you, or at least a part of you. Therefore, he too would be bound by the same contract that Yu's under, and thus able to get inside the Velvet Room. And if that wasn't enough, what's even more interesting is that this happens at a point in the game when Teddy is beginning to question the very nature of his own identity. Coincidence? I think not. In fact, the first thing that Teddy says to you upon entering the Velvet Room is,
"I've been thinking all this time who I really am.
Oh really? Maybe the answer is staring you quite literally in the face. Now, just to address a counter-argument that's probably already coming, other people enter the Velvet Room in other Persona games. Minato in 3 and pretty much everyone in 2 as just some examples. But remember, the Velvet Room that we see in Persona 4 is unique. It looks like the interior of a limousine, making it physically distinct from the booth-like appearance of the Velvet Room from earlier Persona games. When Igor meets you for the first time and refers to this place being off limits to anyone who hasn't entered into a contract with him, he's referring to that specific place, that specific Velvet Room with the limousine appearance. Notice how none of the other Velvet Rooms have that sort of contractual stipulation. So the rules of one room in a past game shouldn't necessarily apply to the way that Persona 4's room chooses to operate. Counter-argument number 2. Teddy isn't Yu's shadow because Yu doesn't have a shadow. Yu is special. He's the chosen one. And I could totally see why you might think that. Over the course of the game, we learn that not just anyone can enter the TV world. As we find out, the only way that people can enter the Midnight Channel is by going with someone who's been granted this special gift from the gods. Yu just so happens to possess the gift. So maybe the fact that Yu has the god's blessing explains why all his friends encounter their shadow in the TV world, well, he never has to. It's an explanation that would make sense if we didn't have evidence directly to the contrary. You see, it's revealed that only 3 people have received the TV gift. Yu is one. The other 2 are Namatame and Adachi, the villains of the story responsible for throwing innocent victims into the TV world. And it's here that the explanation of Yu is special doesn't hold up, because both Namatame and Adachi have the gift, but both still have shadows who appear in the TV land. Namatame and Adachi both merge with their shadows when you fight them as bosses. Yu is one of a kind. He's a paradox. He has a persona but no shadow, and he's literally the only one who's like this. The unusual connection between Yu and Teddy even makes sense when you view it through the lens of the game's themes. One of the things that the Persona games love to do is play with the idea of tarot cards. Each relationship that's expressed in the game as a social link is represented as one of the major arcana tarot cards. Someone call in Miss Cleo because they're a big deal in this series. What? I don't even know what that was, like Italian mixed with fail. Call in Miss Cleo because tarot cards are a big deal in this series, and one of the things that makes the Persona games really special is the incredible attention to detail and the way that the game matches different characters and social links to arcana that parallel their attributes. Yu's arcana at the top of the game is the Fool, which represents innocence, divine inspiration, madness, freedom, spontaneity, inexperience, chaos, and creativity. In nearly every regard, he's the embodiment of a blank slate. Now, if the player reaches the true end, Yu's persona ascends to the World Arcana, a representation of totality, a symbol of fulfillment, wholeness, harmony. This lines up with what's happening in the story when Yu's persona ascends. He's literally becoming the savior of the world. Now look at Teddy's arcana, the Star, which is associated with hope, self-confidence, faith, altruism, luck, generosity, peace, and joy. These match exactly with what we know about Teddy. He's all about cheering people on, getting along with others. But in addition to matching Teddy's personalities, these are the exact traits that Yu has to adopt for himself in his evolution from spontaneous and experienced fool to hero of the world. He needs to take the world's burdens upon himself. That, in many ways, is the ultimate in altruism and generosity. He also needs to become a symbol of hope as the world places their faith in him. Again, all features that Teddy already has and that Yu wouldn't have, but his shadow, his unacknowledged half, probably would. So taking all this evidence into consideration, I think here's how it worked. When Yu was selected by the gods to receive his gift and the special persona, it left his true shadow, Teddy, with no home and no purpose. He'd been kicked to the curb. It left Teddy free to develop into his own furry Kinder Egg. It's how a confirmed former shadow with no memory of his owner and a lingering identity crisis is able to do the things shadows would never be able to do that we see Teddy do in this game, like cross into the real world and gain his own persona, get into the Velvet Room without a contract. Not only does theorizing that Teddy is Yu's shadow answer 2 of the game's biggest unsolved mysteries, it also fits with the game's arcana themes and overall game mechanics. As the true ending shows, Yu and Teddy share an unbreakable link, an unbreakable social link. And considering that Persona 4 is a game all about forming bonds with other people, but most importantly forming bonds with yourself, I can't think of a better way to demonstrate exactly that. Well, outside of making it a bit more obvious so it doesn't take a theory 10 years after the fact to expose the truth. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.